The Future Investment Initiative is happening, and Larry Fink, Ray Dalio, and Jamie Dimon are on this stage. I watched this whole thing. It was incredible. I try to understand the global impact of where money is going, what investments are being made, and I think there's a lot of value here for you guys. So I'm going to play 3 clips. First is by Ray Dalio, and then I'm going to get into Jamie Dimon, and then we're going to get into Mr. Fink. These guys control trillions of dollars. Ray Dalio is going to talk about the 5 forces affecting the global economy. Let's go ahead and get into this because it is super interesting, and we're going to go ahead and talk about it after we play the clips. Let's do it.
The largest hedge fund in the world, Bridgewater, and you're also, in your new career, also an author. You've written a number of New York Times best-selling books. In one of your recent books, you talked about 5 forces that are affecting the global economy. Can you succinctly tell us how these forces are going to move the economy forward the next couple of years or so, adversely or positively?
Adversely, I'm a fear, but positively, potentially. Yeah, as a global macro investor for the last 50 years, my job has been to bet on what is going to happen globally macro. And what I learned in my lifetime is that many of the things that surprised me happened because they didn't happen in my lifetime, but they happened many times in history, particularly in the 1930 to 45 period. So these 5 forces have always interacted, and I think everything that we're going to talk about today will be related to those 5 forces, and they interact. And those 5 forces, of course, are the debt, money, interest rate, economy force. The second is the internal order or disorder. In other words, the internal conflicts that we are having today and the debts that we are having today are the largest since the 1930 to 45 period. And also you go back in history and you've seen enormous amounts of those. They have implications. The third great force, of course, is the international geopolitical force. 2 great powers that are rival powers. And then, of course, the fact that there isn't a single world order, there isn't a single world power. It's very different than in 1945 when the New World Order was created, because you have a war, a dominant power comes out, or dominant powers, and they set the rules, and everybody goes by the rules. This is a very different world. And those 3 forces, I wanted to examine those over the last 500 years, because to think about rises and declines of reserve currencies, rises and declines of empires, and so on, I needed to get the perspective of that. And I discovered that the other 2 great big forces were acts of nature. Droughts, floods, and pandemics have killed more people than wars, and are certainly a dominant force at this time. And then the 5th great force has always been man's inventiveness and technologies. So we have these 5 forces interacting. So everything that we're going to talk about will be related to each one of those. And I think if we step back and we put each one of those in a historic perspective, say, how are their degrees of influence compared to those in history? The largest wealth gaps since the 1930 to 45 period, populism and so on. So those are the 5 forces. I think if we're looking at them.
Populism, he's talking about like in America, where you have populism where people are either Trump fans or they're Biden fans. Whoever's the most popular wins. When he's talking about 45, that was the end of the war, in the World War II. But he's saying that history repeats itself. And that's what he was talking about here, that he's thinking that history is repeating itself. America's had the reserve currency for 80 years. And usually those are the type of life cycles, 80, 90 years, are when things start to go really bad, right? There's too much money being created, too much money printing, not enough taxes being taken in, right? America, we love to spend money, but we don't like to pay our taxes. I think that might be true everywhere, but that's the problem. We're spending more than we're taking in. We're spending $7 trillion, $8 trillion a year. We're taking in $4 to $5 trillion in taxes. That is the biggest problem. All right. And the president and people in Congress, they don't want to raise taxes on businesses, but they also don't want to raise taxes on all the people that have to go to the voting booths. So where's that balance, that equilibrium? And that's what he's talking about here.
And their evolution, watching a movie play out over and over again, if you have that historical perspective. And as we're looking at it, what we're seeing around the world today, as we go into the elections that we're going to see in the United States, going to be over irreconcilable differences about wealth and power. And then we look at the geopolitical situation, and then we look at the climate issue. The climate issue is going to cost us, it's estimated, between $5 and $10 trillion a year in a world GDP that produces $100 trillion. So anyway, I think that those five big forces, as we look at, if we look at historical perspectives and analogous periods, I think that'll help us. I think we have to be concerned about that dynamic that's taking place.
Put it simply, for next year, are you optimistic about the global economy or pessimistic?
Pessimistic.
All right, so he doesn't think it's a good outlook. All right, so next is Jamie Dimon. This is a great clip. Jamie Dimon is going to tell you that central banks 18 months ago were dead wrong. All right, he's also going to say he's going to ask him if he's optimistic or pessimistic about the outcome of next year, what he thinks is going to happen. And so let's go ahead and get into this clip.
Going forward, and are you as obsessed as many people are in the financial world about whether the Fed is going to increase interest rates again or cut interest rates? Does it make that much difference to the economy as you see it?
Yeah, so David, thank you, folks. Thank you for having me here again, and I'll give you the...
Jamie Dimon is the head of JP Morgan Chase. He's been very successful. I listened to this hour-and-a-half video about how Chase and JP Morgan and these banks merged way back in the day, and Jamie Dimon came in and reshaped how Chase did business. They were losing money. He came in and they're managing over $3 trillion right now. I've seen the number as high as $5 trillion, but I'm sure it goes up and down with the economy and how much value home prices are and equity prices, stocks, and this and that. So let me go ahead and play this and see what he has to say.
Optimistic thing, I think it's wonderful. I've been coming to Saudi Arabia since 2005, and what's changed here is so dramatic and so good. And not just what they've done inside Saudi Arabia, but trying to bring peace to the Middle East. And please, in spite of what happened in Israel, I urge you all to keep up that effort. It is the only way to get there with some leadership from Saudi Arabia for all the folks in the Middle East. And I'm generally an optimist. I think you'd be foolish not to look at some of these things taking place today in Ukraine, Middle East. Obviously, my heart goes out for Ukraine, but also it's affecting oil, food prices, gas prices, migration, potential.
Ukraine and Russia make the most grain in the world, those two countries, and Russia has been targeting the grain supplies in Ukraine over the last several months or since the war started. They've attacked the infrastructure. If Ukraine cannot produce this grain and get it to places that need to make bread and rice and these type of things, that could be a global food supply shortage, which could kill a lot of people. That's what he was talking about there. Just to give you some context.
Starvation is probably the most serious thing we faced. And I hear people talking about ESG all the time. I just would put on your table the most serious thing facing mankind is nuclear proliferation. If we're not sitting here 100 years from now, it will be nuclear proliferation. It's not climate. And so I think when you look at the geopolitical situation, as complex as we've seen, and I don't know if it's 19 or 1938, obviously we all hope it goes away. I think it's a little bit of wishful thinking. It's going to take real leadership on the part of many people out there. And then I look at the financial situation, the fiscal spending, which is more than it's ever, I'm talking about the United States, but it's almost true around the world. It's more than it's ever been in peacetime by a long shot, with the highest debt levels we've ever had by government. And there's this kind of omnipotent feeling that central banks and governments can manage through all this stuff. I'm cautious. I don't think it makes a piece of difference whether rates go up 25 basis points or more. Like zero, none, nada. I think whether the whole curve goes up 100 basis points, I urge people, be prepared for it. I don't know if it's going to happen. But I look at what we're seeing today more like the 70s. A lot of spending, a lot of it's going to be wasted. I'm in favor of this whole ESG effort. On the other hand, if you look at the way we're going about it, it's almost like governments want to whack them all and force it, but no carbon taxes, no rational way to go about it that would be more important. In the United States, for example, you can't build pipelines to reduce coal emissions. You can't get the permits to build solar and wind and things like that. We better get our act together. I'm hopeful when I listen to all the R&D, see it around the world, we will make the breakthroughs we need to beat climate. But it's going to be a day later and longer than it should be because of our own basic incompetence. I also want to add one last thing. I'm taking this from Bob Gates. To fix this, it's going to take real leadership from the Western world, in particular America, but leadership which is not just military, diplomatic, development, finance. And this development finance, I don't know if Ajay's still here, what we need in development finance dwarfs what governments can do. So it can't be done without private capital, and private capital isn't going to come in if you build something that gets taken from a government or something like that. So we have a lot of work to do. It's one of the reasons I think these events are positive, but I would be quite concerned. And the other thing about when you look at economics, I think people prepare for possibilities and probabilities, not calling one course of action, since I've never seen anyone call it. I want to point out that central banks 18 months ago were 100% dead wrong. Okay, so maybe there should be humility about financial forecasting. I would be quite cautious about what might happen next year.
It's been
All right. This is a great conversation, and they go on for a little bit longer, but I want to get into Mr. Fink, Larry Fink. He runs BlackRock. BlackRock is a $10 trillion asset manager, just a monster. Larry Fink, you may know, he's been talking about crypto lately. A lot of people are getting bullish. He doesn't talk about crypto here, but he's talking about interest rates and a few other things. Let's go ahead and let me play this, and we'll talk about it.
Okay, so maybe there should be humility about
a tidal wave, and people are basically still investing in equities as much as they did before.
Again, thank you for being here. It's always great to be in the kingdom. As Jamie said, the transformation of the kingdom in the last 7 years is totally heartwarming. And I would also just want to echo, as capitalists, as business leaders, we all have a responsibility to speak a little louder today in a polarizing world. In a polarizing world where we're seeing terrorism, we're watching 2 wars, and here we are trying to talk about how to make it a better world. That's what this is about. And we also have to then focus on the unpleasant parts of what's denying the world for better growth. So we all have to be better humanitarians, and we all have to be more focused on how to ensure that the political side of the world understands that peace and prosperity does work a lot longer and does shape and lift more human beings to middle class and higher standard of living. And conflicts actually create much more global problems for the majority of the world. We are going to see higher interest rates, David. We're going to see higher interest rates for longer. This reminds me of the 70s. I think some of us were on trading desks in the 70s. And the 70s was all about bad policy. Today it's about bad policy again. Big macro shifts, as Ray spoke about it. The polarization, the politicization of supply chains, the fragmentation is a big result of it. That is inflationary. Also, I say populism is very inflationary because we respond to the immediacy of the moment. We don't talk about the long-term issues. As we see more and more countries move to the far, we see more threats towards immigration. The lack of immigration is very inflationary, especially in the United States. Talking about legal immigration. And then we've had a government, I'm talking about the U.S. now, 2000, been an $8 trillion deficit. Today we have a $33 trillion deficit. So the deficit's grown by more than $1 trillion each year over the last 23 years. That is highly inflationary. The balance sheet of the Federal Reserve is highly inflationary. And so all these different measures are much more structural, much more difficult. So as a result of that, interest rates are going to remain higher. Opportunities for investors are going to be able to be very patient. You could do nothing and enjoy a positive return.
So are you expecting a hard landing or a soft landing in the United States, or you just can't project?
We will not see a hard or a soft landing in 2024. The amount of fiscal stimulus that is just entering the economy, which is very inflationary. The CHIPS Act, the IRA, and the Infrastructure Act is about $970 billion. The largest peacetime non-pandemic moment of fiscal stimulus. At the same time, our central bank is trying to arrest the economy. And so that's just hitting the J curve. And in labor settlements right now, what's going on in labor talk, 25% increases in wages. I don't see a problem, but I do believe the Federal Reserve is going to have to raise rates higher, which probably will mean by 25 we may have a soft, we may have a hard landing. That is the only way I see how we're going to be arresting this. But I don't expect it anytime soon. I think the power of the economy, the power of the consumer that Jamie bought a lot, is giving me comfort that the economy is fine. Obviously, other parts of the world, the European economy is facing much more severe headwinds. And the one thing that I would say about the U.S. economy, we have a spectacular capital markets. We have the greatest capital markets in the world. Every country is trying to build their own capital markets. I had many conversations yesterday about how the kingdom is trying to raise its capital markets. In our capital markets, we have the most unique mortgage market. 98% of all mortgages are fixed, 30-year fixed. So the transmission of high rates in the U.S. economy just takes much longer to impact the economy. And so that transmission is not impacted as fast as the transmission of higher rates in other parts of the world. That's in Europe, where they have more 5-year fixed and floating, especially in the UK. you see the transmission of higher rates impacting economies faster.
So what he's talking about there is in the UK, every 5 years, people have to go out and renew their interest rate loan on their home. In America, we can go out and get a 30-year fixed mortgage. So like a lot of people that bought before the rates started going up, they're locked in for 30 years at 2%, 3%. Right now, you're looking at 6, 7%. Sometimes loans are bought down a little bit, but rates are pretty high. And they're saying rates could even go higher. But that's what Larry's talking about here. That's why he's saying that capital markets in America hasn't, the inflation and the hurt hasn't yet hit America as it's hit places in Europe and other parts of the world. That's what he's get at there. But he says that it could be coming. And he doesn't see a recession, or he doesn't see rates coming down in 2024. So that means we're going to have higher rates for longer. And it's not just Larry Fink that said this. Jamie Dimon and some others have said this. So they think, and I was looking at some different economists talking about the Fed. They're talking about 2026 rates coming down. So we could have 2 years of higher rates. And we're just as I'm 39. I didn't start paying attention to all of this economy and crypto and all this stuff over the last 5 or 10 years, right? I've been in crypto 4 years, but I started paying attention a little bit more about the economy. In my early 20s, I didn't really care, but now I'm paying attention to it. But we haven't experienced over the last 3 or 4 decades the higher interest rates for longer. Usually rates go up for a year or two and then they come back down. But this could be a prolonged period of higher rates for longer. And that is what he was talking about here. I'll let him finish off and then I'll end this video because I know it's been running a little bit long, but so much good information here. I thought this was very valuable and I wanted to share with you guys. Really excited about it.
And I would just say one last thing, intersecting what Yasser said, intersecting what Ajay said. When you intersect what technology is going to do, robotics, and the intersection of AI and robotics, we are going to have a boost in productivity. And that is going to be the next wave for deflation. That is not going to happen anytime in the next few years. So I'm more optimistic today than I was 4 years ago.
Okay.
The transformation in medicine, we are shaping lives through diabetic therapies that are now showing total impact on the health of heart disease, of diabetes, of kidney disease. And something quite personal to me, the medicines for dementia and Alzheimer's is changing the curve of decline by 50%. There are so many reasons to be optimistic. And the pages on the newspapers, on websites, is all about the pessimism. And I'm more of a believer how technology is going to shape these economies and help us out. We may have 1 or 2 years of struggling, but I am powerfully optimistic about how technology is going to be rapidly shape our world.
Okay. Awesome, guys. A lot of great information. I will include the link to this whole video. It's about 1 hour and 10 minutes below. There's also other videos I plan to do because there's a lot of stuff coming out of this future investment initiative, and it's really great information. It might not be about crypto, but it's about the economy, and I find this incredibly interesting. I hope you do too. If you made it to the end, please let me know down in the comments. And what do you think? Are we headed for a soft landing? Are we headed for higher rates for longer? Where do you think the world is headed, and where do you think your country? Let me know down below and I will get back to you. If you want to support the channel, you can become a Cryptonairz member, you can become a supporter here on YouTube, or you can buy some dope merch that also does help me, and you can look good while doing that. So I'll see you in the next one. Thanks, guys. Aloha.